Story 1. I sat next to a man on a flight who told me that the reason my ears were hurting was due to the new flight paths into the airport, which mean aircraft stay higher until closer and then have to descend faster. The flight paths to the south, where we were arriving from, haven't changed. I can say this with a certain level of certainty as an air traffic controller at that airport. Story 2. When I started my current job, I was informed about several things that tractors cannot do, which is why we had to perform so much manual labor. I stopped arguing and began accomplishing what they said was impossible right in front of them. Before I got injured, I was an agricultural equipment technician. Story 3. A friend who is into conspiracy theories tried to tell me that an electronic system I have operated and maintained for years was designed to create weather, even though it only tracks weather. I have 3 degrees in the field, but he would rather believe random people on YouTube than me. Story 4. During my semester abroad, one of my fellow students tried to explain how complex the German language is and how proficient she is in it, emphasizing that I would never understand such a difficult language. I am German. Story 5. A freshman in nursing school tried to tell me that insulin treats low blood sugar and insisted that she should give me a shot while I was experiencing hypoglycemia because she was in nursing school and I should trust her. Insulin can actually cause low blood sugar. I am diabetic and she would have harmed me, so I told her to leave me alone. Story 6. I am a scientist who designs vaccines. While in graduate school, I submitted a patent application for a live attenuated virus vaccine candidate. Someone once told me that I cannot trust vaccine scientists because I need to conduct the research myself to have confidence in them. I explained that I have a pending patent on a vaccine and that I conducted the research independently. He left with his tail between his legs. Story 7. General construction. I am not in the trades, but my family was. 2 of my uncles were fully qualified. One an electrician and the other a plumber turned gas engineer. When I was a teenager, I spent a year training with each of them while trying to decide on a career, so they taught me as an apprentice. From there, I decided to try out for joinery because it was the one major trade no one in my family was qualified for, but I dropped it after 2 years. I am not highly skilled in any of those areas, but I am skilled enough to do most jobs and understand the work. One day, my landlord was upgrading the heating in a block of flats. Having done a lot of maintenance in that place and knowing the landlord's usual team, I was familiar with the location, mainly that, for some reason, the building plans for my flat were inaccurate. I informed the technician cutting up my floor that the pipes run in a different location due to a flood years back. He laughed and explained how I was mistaken, insisting that he was the expert. He cut through the main water line before the stopcock, causing 3 flats to require an entire internal remodel because he was so sure of himself. I never had a more satisfying moment than when I thought, I told you so. I understand his perspective as a professional, but when someone tells you they have been on site and have knowledge of a structure you have only seen a 25-year-old drawing of, perhaps take that into account when they inform you of significant changes. Story 8. My cousin once tried to lecture me on how to fly a drone properly and mentioned that they could fly theirs up to 600 feet legally and fly at night without lights. I have flown drones for much longer than they have, and I have studied all the laws surrounding them to become certified. You are legally not allowed to fly a drone above 400 feet above ground level without structures nearby or special permissions. You must also have anti-collision lights on your aircraft at night. I asked them if they had their certification, and they responded like a deer in headlights. Story 9. I went to buy some used windows for my daughter's playhouse. The seller talked extensively about his success and the rental properties he owns. He mentioned hiding assets during bankruptcy cases. I just stood there listening, not saying much. I work for the United States government and was on the phone with the United States bankruptcy trustee for our district that morning. Story 10. I am a clockmaker and I am also quite young, in my early 30s. I receive many comments from older individuals who used to be engineers or mechanics. They often express that they are more skilled than I am and frequently offer to teach me if I need help. It was much worse when I was younger. I began college for this at 21. I have attended 2 different colleges, one for a 4-year degree focused on basic skills and another for 2 years at a university to gain more in-depth knowledge in conservation science, as well as additional experience. I have worked for 3 different clockmakers before securing a part-time contract at a clock museum and helping my former tutor rewrite the theory books on horology. I am currently employed at a high-end art conservation institute. It is safe to say I am well-versed in mechanical clocks and knowledgeable about historic timekeeping devices. Yet, I still occasionally encounter an ex-engineer who claims he knows everything, and I often find myself internally frustrated by the nonsense he speaks, especially when I notice that his portfolio features only basic clocks with rarely any more complicated functions. Story 11. My old therapist went on a tangent about her whole concept of quantum therapy, vibe energies, and magnetic therapy, explaining how it could help me. She concluded by saying, "You're in a science degree. You know what I am talking about." Well, I do know what she is talking about. Nonsense. A course in university had me read a book on pseudoscience, and her ideas were literally included in it as a textbook example of nonsense. Story 12. I have a boss who tries to lecture me about coffee, operational procedures for coffee shops, staff management, and consistency every week. Each week, I have to remind him that I have been in this business for 17 years at a high level. He has never once worked behind a cafe bar, and I'm not even sure he knows how to make his own coffee. I have been here for 3 months, and my boss is our roaster. We have completely run out of coffee beans twice, despite him receiving plenty of notice beforehand that he should roast. During the next lecture I receive about consistency, I will record it so I can play it back for him when we inevitably run out of coffee again. Story 13. I work for an import broker. These past few months have been interesting, with people trying to explain tariffs to me. Story 14. Anglers often share incorrect information about fish. They tend to argue that fisheries managers are misinformed. I am a marine biologist studying fish life history. Story 15. A friend asked me to help him wire up a subpanel in his garage. He specifically sought my assistance because of my experience. Wanting to appear knowledgeable in front of his wife, he questioned and challenged me on everything. He didn't question the facts or the method. He questioned me, if that makes sense. I told him in front of his wife, "You're not arguing with me, you're arguing with electricity. I didn't invent it. I just install it and I can tell you how to work safely. If you want to argue with the panel after I'm gone, go ahead, but you'll lose." Story 16. I work in tech support and deal with this every day. It's amazing how many people argue with me about how that won't work, you don't need to access that, or my IT guy said this. I do this for a living and have a degree in computer science, so please let me do my job. Story 17. I had a person lecture me on the expected phenotype of a genetically engineered mouse. I was the one who created it. Story 18. Someone I used to be friends with has always been a know-it-all and very into technology. One time, he started discussing camera sensor sizes and how they do not matter because more megapixels equal better photos or something similar. I do not remember exactly, as this was a long time ago. I have been a photographer for over 10 years and I just let him go on about whatever he was saying, only to finally respond with something like, "It's crazy how you sound like you know what you're talking about because of how confidently you speak, but it's just totally incorrect." The strange thing is that he actually knows I am a photographer, so I do not understand why he was trying to explain camera technology to me as if I did not know about it. Story 19. I worked for the same oil company for 25 years as a landman. A landowner was seeking extra compensation for crop loss due to unusual contractor activities on his land. When I explained that right-of-way access across his land was part of his annual compensation, which was explained 20 years ago when he signed the agreement, he denied it. He wanted full compensation for his crop. He forgot that I had explained the agreement to him 20 years earlier, but he realized it was true when I showed him the copies I brought with me. Story 20. Someone asked for my opinion on their bathroom remodel, and I said it was absolutely not going to work. They didn't trust me, but I am licensed in this field. Now the sink they bought doesn't fit. Story 21. I gave a fairly opinionated oncologist and some other medical professionals a tour of one of our particle accelerators. It was a fact-finding trip as they were considering a similar machine for a hospital setting. She kept interrupting me to explain how various parts of the accelerator work to her colleagues and, importantly, how to install and commission one. Almost every detail was incorrect. I chose the accelerator, negotiated the purchasing contract and acceptance tests, worked on the design of the building, and completed all the radiation shielding calculations. I was on site every day during construction. I installed and commissioned the machine and am responsible for its operation and maintenance. I designed part of the target and the end stations. It was my life for a number of years. Nod and smile, nod and smile. Story 22. I had a spiritual yoga instructor in India tell me that a Saudi prince invented a quantum energy generator and was keeping it a secret for various reasons. My theoretical physics degree disagreed. Story 23. I encounter this often when playing pool because I am laid back and just having fun. I was once qualified to play in a national league but chose not to participate due to the costs. It's enjoyable when my opponent starts giving me tips, and then I run 5 or more right away. Story 24. Taxes. I worked in public accounting for a decade, and the number of people who tell me I'm wrong on various topics is ridiculous. Basic tax accounting should be taught in high school. It is astounding the amount of misinformation that the media can portray. Story 25. I had a friend give me an extensive and detailed explanation of how he machines items, while his wife sat next to him saying, "Babe, that's your job. You're a machinist." Story 26. Studied metallurgy and set up a home blacksmith shop around the time everyone was claiming that jet fuel cannot melt steel beams. Story 27. I presented type 1 diabetes at a science fair at my private school. Every parent, teacher, including the science teacher and my principal, tried to tell me that to cure diabetes you just don't eat sugar. I was around 15 at the time and had diabetes since I was a child. I chose the topic because I thought it would be an easy A. It was frustrating trying to explain why the teacher was wrong and being labeled as disrespectful and unruly while receiving an average grade. Story 28. I had a person at my last job try to tell me I was wrong about a calculation for a financial planning client. When he noticed my skeptical expression, because he was misunderstanding the applicable rules, he pulled out a resource and waved it in front of me, insisting I was incorrect and suggesting I should stay updated with the industry. As it turned out, I was the primary author of that resource. Story 29. Not me, but my good friend. She is a certified brewmaster, which is a significant achievement in the brewing industry. She holds a master's degree in zymology and has multiple academic publications in the field of beer brewing. She is also a woman in her 30s, not a model, but attractive enough to draw attention from men. Whenever she attends beer events or visits big breweries, some guy inevitably approaches her, trying to impress her with his beer knowledge. On the few occasions I have been there to witness the situation, I could see her contemplating the best way to address the man and put him in his place. It is definitely entertaining. Story 30. I once had a discussion about public key encryption with a new colleague at work. He quoted a white paper he found on the company intranet to support his position. I asked him, "Did you check the author of that paper? Because you're talking to him." Not only was he quoting my own paper to win an argument, but he had also completely misinterpreted it. It was one of the most memorable 5 minutes of my work life. Story 31. When I tell people I am a psychologist, they often take it as an opportunity to tell me all about energy healing, astrology, auras, manifesting, and general New Age pseudoscience, as though I would support those ideas. While some therapists may, I am a research psychologist, so I care about evidence and peer review and do not believe in magic. Story 32. I work in marketing and advertising. I have 35 years of experience as a copywriter, creative director, and strategist before being recruited by a Fortune 500 company. Recently, my sister told me that nobody is on social media, so it's not a legitimate marketing channel. Never mind that I have executed highly successful social media campaigns with incredible return on investment. Since she doesn't use social media, she believes nobody does. I also have a friend who hiked to the base camp of Mount Everest. He trained for 3 years, and during the trip, he lost 50 pounds. Half of his team had to be evacuated due to altitude sickness. Yet, my sister told him, "Buffed, Everest, anyone could do that. I could do that next week." She is also the person who lectured my daughter on how the country was founded on Christian principles. My daughter, who holds a master's degree in early American religious history, Spent 15 minutes explaining where my sister was mistaken, but evidently, all her fellowships, research, and readings don't matter. I eventually advised my daughter to let it go. Even if she could have brought James Madison, the author of the Constitution, back to back her up, my sister would have found a way to argue with him. I should be used to it by now, but it continues to annoy me. Story 33. Someone confidently told me that the United States is the only country with free speech. When I explained that this was categorically false, he tried to argue with me, even after I presented the European Union Charter and other concrete evidence. As a lawyer, I found it to be one of the most frustrating conversations I have ever had. Story 34. I have heard some incredible things, usually about the weather, while being a passenger on planes. I fly planes for a living. The best experience, however, was getting lectured by a private pilot while I was in uniform, standing at the door of the cockpit I had just exited. It was the exact opposite of the original post's question, but it amazed me so much that I could only contain my laughter until he left the plane. Story 35. I realized that I often acted like a know-it-all in my 20s. I wasn't always a nice person, but discovering that I was lecturing an expert was a humbling experience that I remind myself of from time to time. I frequently express my thoughts on Reddit, and while it may be a way for me to vent, it helps me keep my opinions to myself in real life, which I can accept. Story 36. The number of times someone in my New Age spiritual Mormon family has tried to lecture me on genetically modified organisms, while I have a master's degree in molecular genetics, is quite surprising. Story 37. A Catholic priest at the Catholic university where I was teaching attempted to explain the Spanish Inquisition as doing more good than harm, suggesting it was beneficial to many Jews. I encountered the argument similar to slavery was beneficial to black people because they received free room and board, but it was repurposed for medieval Europe and anti-Semitism. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the Inquisition. Spoiler alert: it was not beneficial to Jewish people. The treatment of them and others even suspected of being secretly Jewish was so horrific that it would make footage of war crimes look like children's programming. Story 38. I was a sommelier and wine director starting at a restaurant that hadn't opened yet. Meeting sales representatives for the first time is always a bit of feeling each other out, but this one sales representative straightforwardly asked me, "So, do you know anything about wine?" There's no way to answer that question without sounding rude. Do I say yes and mention my credentials, making them feel inferior? Do I say no, only to let them find out later that I was lying? I simply mumbled, yeah, just to let them continue with their presentation. They had a junior representative with them who knew me from a previous job. He jumped in and qualified me, and he later apologized for the representative's behavior. We didn't do much business with that company. Story 39. A lawyer more arrogant than most and I were in a popular bar with friends. He was talking down to me while I was trying to help him solve a simple technical issue with his smartphone. He told me that since he was a trained lawyer from a good university, he knew computers and that I should just listen to him. I got everyone to laugh and clap when I mentioned that I had a PhD in systems engineering from one of the best technical universities and maybe he should stop boasting and just listen so we could solve this problem quickly and get back to having fun. Story 40. I was a cook at a busy seafood restaurant. There was a dishwasher in his mid-20s. I became friends with him and let him live at my place when he had no other options. I convinced him to move up to a cooking position instead of wasting time as a dishwasher. He became the salad person. He applied to be sponsored to attend cooking school, went for training, and came back after a few months. His whole attitude changed. He thought he was better than all of us now. He would go around telling us the proper way to do everything, which was quite annoying. He also started trying to impress the chef to get ahead. He self-appointed himself as the night supervisor. He would clock in and start doing all kinds of prep for the night shift. Then, as soon as the chef and the night crew left, he would change and sit at the bar drinking for the next 8 hours. He would watch us do all the work during the dinner rush. At the end of our shift, he would clock out and go home. None of us wanted to be a snitch, so nobody said anything. He had no friends there because everyone despised him. I was cooking the rice and washing it until the water ran clear when he came over and asked what I was doing. He told me to just add the water and let it cook, trying to instruct me how to cook rice. In my head, I thought, I was cooking rice when you were still in diapers. I am Asian. Story 41. I just saw a friend I hadn't seen in a while, and he was enthusiastic, sharing his thoughts on tariffs and how I was mistaken. He has a general educational development certificate, while I hold a degree in economics. Story 42. I don't try to get into these situations, but personal computer enthusiasts can have some of the most confidently incorrect personalities. I am a computer architecture researcher, so I have a relatively intimate understanding of hardware and software design and how they impact performance. However, your 10-minute technology news entertainment video definitely qualifies you to tell me why something is always true and that I am wrong for saying it isn't. Story 43. I have degrees in politics and history, international relations, sociology, and criminology. Many topics captivate people's interest, and they have attempted to explain them to me. One instance that comes to mind is when an insurance company informed me that my car insurance was increasing due to crime in my area. I used crime mapping of my neighborhood as an example in my lectures. It wasn't. Story 44. I met my brother and his wife's friend for the first time. This friend explained all about the television industry based on his 18 months of work for small production companies in the city where he lives. He wouldn't let me get a word in. He just went on about life in the film industry. I am a production manager in television with over 15 years of full-time experience. I have worked on projects including major films, comedies for streaming platforms featuring household names, and national United Kingdom broadcast television shows. Not that he knew, he didn't stop to ask. Story 45. I met my new girlfriend's sister a few months ago. For some reason, she decided to share her thoughts on the conspiracies surrounding COVID and the vaccines. Unbeknownst to her, I had recently obtained my PhD in pandemics, vaccines, and human behaviors. I chose to remain silent and let her continue, as nothing I said would have changed her perspective. Story 46. Using a torque wrench. How a piping and instrumentation diagram works. They used my work as an example. Many aspects related to my job. Story 47. My male friend explained to me that women do not experience inequality and dangerous situations as often as they claim. He believes the assertion that they are treated differently in the workplace and medical environments is unfounded. He argues that women tend to be sensitive and overreact. He also mentioned that men sometimes get denied jobs so that women can secure positions, which he feels is unfair. He thinks that the need for women to carry pepper spray or weapons and remain constantly aware of their surroundings is merely a sign of paranoia. He believes that situations labeled as harassment by men are just misunderstandings caused by women being unclear or rude. He suggests that if a woman is not interested in someone, she should simply say no. This perspective comes from a man who puts minimal effort into life and blames society for his poor quality of life. I am a hardworking woman who has experienced firsthand the issues he claims are untrue. When I shared my experiences as examples, I was told I was lying to win the argument. He dismissed my experiences, arguing that if I did encounter such situations, I am just one person, which does not prove anything. Story 48. I have a master's degree in library science, and I taught classes on information literacy at the college level, focusing on how to find credible sources and identify when a source is incorrect or potentially biased. I have given up on having conversations with individuals who rely exclusively on websites promoting conspiracy theories and misinformation. Some people simply want their preconceived notions reinforced, regardless of the validity of the information. It is frustrating to be in a conversation where someone insists I do not know what I am talking about, despite holding a master's degree in identifying reliable information and teaching the subject. Story 49. I work in cybersecurity. This happens all the time to me. There are many misinformed enthusiasts who share all kinds of bad advice and get upset. Many hopefuls straight out of boot camps have learned the basics of one type of vulnerability and try to teach others how to hack. The saddest cases are people who are clearly struggling and are convinced that an advanced threat actor has hacked their phone or is surveilling them. They usually do not lecture on the technical aspects but rather on why they believe they are being targeted. The strangest recent event was a talk submission for a conference that I reviewed on a topic I am somewhat knowledgeable about. The speaker had a great reputation on paper, so when none of the description made sense to me, I started doubting myself. I spent longer than I would like to admit researching whether some of the terms used had meanings I was not familiar with. In the end, the talk was complete nonsense. At least I was able to prevent others from being misled. Story 50. I was in a call with a distant friend and their nearby friend. Somehow, we started a conversation about the COVID-19 vaccine. To keep it brief, the other friend expressed distrust regarding its contents and the speed of its development. My friend, who worked on COVID-19 vaccines, knew all about the manufacturing process. After an hour-long discussion, it was clear that he wasn't changing his opinion, despite talking to someone involved in making them. It still surprises me to this day. Story 51. You should stop taking antibiotics when you no longer have symptoms. Otherwise, you may harm your immune system. This is advice from my dad, who encouraged me to attend pharmacy school and often gets frustrated when I correct the inaccurate information he repeats. As a pharmacy student, I aim to specialize in infectious diseases and microbiology. Story 52. Not me personally, but while at a friend's house last year to watch the National Hockey League playoffs, I listened to my brother's ex-girlfriend explain what a driving under the influence charge was to a room full of lawyers. The look on their faces was one of the few times I witnessed someone's brain actually pause. One of them got up to leave the room without saying a word and did not return. Story 53. My mom likes to talk to me about transgender prisoners and how they pose a risk to others. She believes that prisons are full of imposters who want to harm women. I work in the criminal justice system as an analyst and have full access to the data on this. I can confidently correct her by stating that the number of cases where this occurs is extremely small, so small that legislating around it is unnecessary. Despite this, she continues to tell me I am wrong about almost anything related to the topic. Story 54. My stepdad was working on his tax return and mentioned that he and my mom paid points on the house they purchased during the tax year. I told him I was pretty sure they didn't pay any points, and he informed me that almost everyone pays points. I asked him to explain what he thought points were. He then told me that the real estate commission was points. When I explained that points are actually what you pay to buy down your mortgage rate, it got me nowhere. He then said, just because you worked at a real estate office doesn't mean you know everything. Story 55. Anytime someone tries to tell me how to deal with my migraines, I have lost count of how many times I have heard, you just need to drink more water or take a Tylenol. Story 56. I'm at this coffee shop one time, just minding my business and working on some tasks. The guy next to me sees some code on my screen and asks, "Oh, you're into programming?" I reply that I dabble a bit myself. He starts explaining what a for loop is, as if I've never seen one before. He's going all in while I'm just sitting there. I didn't have the heart to tell him I've been coding longer than he's probably been legally allowed to drink. Eventually, I mention that I work as a developer. He pauses and says, "Yeah, bud. Full-time, real job, taxes and all." We had a good laugh afterward. But it's always the confident ones. Story 57. I was on a hike and taking a break at a picnic table, talking with other hikers. A man overheard that I work in physical activity and began discussing how he learned from a YouTuber that everything revolves around hip mobility. He even demonstrated the sloppiest Cossack squats I have ever seen. I replied, "Well, it's not that simple. I am a physical therapist assistant." Story 58. Not sure I could classify myself as an expert on the Battle of Waterloo. I've read 5 or 6 books on it, so I have a pretty decent knowledge. A few months ago, I was watching a video on inaccurate war films. The film Waterloo wasn't in the list, but someone commented that it should be. I agreed, stating that the landscape of the battlefield was completely off, resembling a mountainside. In reality, the battle was fought on gently rolling farmland where the elevation changed by only 20 or 30 meters across the whole battlefield. Someone replied to me, claiming the movie was totally accurate and that I had no idea what I was talking about, asserting that the battlefield was actually very steep. I asked for their email address and offered to send them the photos I had taken on one of my trips to the battlefield a few years ago, but they never replied after that. Story 59. I am a woman who bartends at a brewery. I previously brewed commercially for a few other breweries in the area but returned to bartending full-time because brewing does not pay the bills like bartending does. The constant stream of men explaining every aspect of beer to me, often incorrectly, is always entertaining. Story 60. Someone tried to tell me that edamame isn't a soybean. I am a greenhouse technician and have a degree in horticulture. Story 61. What is legal and not legal when flying a drone or small unmanned aircraft system, especially for police work? To operate in federal airspace, you need to be over 400 feet above ground level, which is generally the ceiling unless you are above a structure or have a waiver. The individual I was taking to jail was a lawyer. I hold a Part 107 license and developed my last agency's drone program from the ground up. Story 62. We had a salesperson from a home security company visit us. He told us various things about how emergency numbers may not work and how their 3G-enabled cloud backup system is secure, claiming that none of their employees could watch us at home. It was the mention of the state-of-the-art 2G and 3G encryption that finally caught my attention. Having worked in telecommunications for nearly 30 years, I have experience with every telecommunications protocol since Global System for Mobile Communications and, in recent years, in cybersecurity, 4th and 5th generation networks, as well as provisioning for emergency systems and cloud technologies. Later that year, the security company was caught because their employees were viewing videos of their female customers, and their cloud security was not very effective either. Story 63. It was on one of the online forums where the discussion was about the economy. One response stated that they knew nothing about how interest rates work. I mentioned that I had an undergraduate degree in finance and a Master of Business Administration and asked them to tell me what I specifically posted that was incorrect. I heard nothing but silence. Story 64. I had someone from my old high school class try to explain aircraft and their contrails, including how to spot them, how they work, and what they do. I am a pilot, and he did not understand even basic atmospheric science and how condensation works. Recently, there have been many people emerging after the crash in Toronto, claiming that the pilot was hired for diversity, equity, and inclusion reasons. Her qualifications and experience were comparable to those of tens of thousands of white male pilots who were hired. Story 65. My sister-in-law's ex, who is an expert on everything, went on a long rant about how language is changing. I have a degree in linguistics, and my thesis focused on colloquialisms and how they enter and become permanent parts of a language. Story 66. I am an art teacher and have been for a couple of decades. My brother-in-law recently explained color theory to me. It was enjoyable. Story 67. I own a home in an old neighborhood, and they recently activated the fiber network that was laid a few years ago. I get people knocking on my door twice a week to ask me to switch to fiber. They confidently tell me about how fiber will help and how it works. However, they are mistaken in many ways. I am an electrical engineer who has specifically designed Ethernet systems with optical components. Story 68. I have a white-collar information technology job, and everyone seems to assume I sailed through my youth in college on a scholarship without having to do real work. I've grown and harvested corn. I've worked in shipping warehouses. I spent a summer in a union factory as a non-union temporary worker, which was the worst job of my life. I don't know how many times people have unknowingly tried to convince me of various myths about food service, especially regarding McDonald's. I spent years doing everything from busing to serving to cooking in places ranging from McDonald's to school cafeterias to fine dining restaurants. If I had to pick one topic, it would be McDonald's. People talk negatively about McDonald's, but in my experience, a non-franchise McDonald's, corporate managed, is much cleaner and better run than any nicer establishment I ever worked in. McDonald's was strict and adhered to food safety regulations. Working there felt like a 3-year-long boot camp on maintaining cleanliness. They were strict about discarding any food that was even slightly past its freshness. Is that wasteful? Absolutely. Is it safer and does it provide better quality for the customer? Absolutely. It was a tough job, primarily due to the constant oversight and correction. I once had to clean the parking lot multiple times because a manager found a single cigarette butt and instructed me to redo the entire area. Story 69. My father tries to lecture me about everything. The best is his marriage advice, despite being divorced 3 times, while I have been happily married for 26 years. Story 70. Someone once told me that thigh chafing is only a plus-size problem, as if they were educating me. Meanwhile, I've worked in this area for years, and I can tell you with full confidence. Chafing doesn't discriminate by size. If you have thighs that touch, which, let's be honest, is most of us, you can deal with chafing. It doesn't matter if you're a size 2 or a size 22, fit from the gym or never met a stare you liked. It happens to all kinds of bodies. Runners, dancers, people in humid climates, and those just trying to enjoy a cute dress on a hot day. It's not about being too big or not toned enough. It's simply friction, sweat, and skin. Totally normal, totally common, and totally annoying. The surprising part? Most people don't even realize how common it is until someone talks about it openly. So next time someone tries to act like it's a niche problem, I've got proof. Story 71. The situation was surprising for me. While attending university, I worked in industry for a year, developing advanced technology as part of my student work. I had to produce a write-up for my course, and my professor left a brief comment. Not really. I reacted strongly, expressing my frustration to others, claiming that he had no understanding of the subject. 2 years later, I learned that he owned the technology company related to that work. Story 72. My father hired someone to install a satellite dish on our house because our old one was destroyed in a storm. The technician spoke condescendingly to my dad and provided a special cover for the remote that simplified most of the buttons for older users. He then attempted to sell my dad a series of upgrades that he neither wanted nor requested. So, my dad brought the technician into the house and began pulling out schematics and diagrams. My dad was the lead engineer who designed the dish, satellite, and receiver. He just didn't want to go on the roof himself. Story 73. A person I was seeing tried to lecture me on the origins of words from Latin based on a book he was reading. I swiftly corrected him, and we spent an hour discussing it before I showed him the proof, and he conceded. I have studied Romance languages and Latin for over a decade. Story 74. Any topic related to Obama's policies during his term. I was studying political science and international affairs, but ended up taking many public administration classes. Story 75. Many times over the years, people have tried to argue with me about how the various components of a certain very large website work. It is famously known to be somewhat of a black box, despite millions of people depending on it. I tell them they are mistaken and try to explain what is correct, as much as I can, but they do not believe me, despite the fact that I was either present when those components were built or built them myself. Story 76. I struck a deal with a professor at my university. I could use some of his lab space to operate my personal 3D printer if I taught workshops for him. I walked in on my printer being repaired by a graduate student. He had the machine partially dismantled and was rebuilding it. He began lecturing me about how poorly I had maintained that machine, stating it was university property and that I had damaged it through ineptitude. He then proceeded to explain how it all worked. The thing is, I was teaching the workshops at my university. I also taught classes over the summer at another university as an adjunct instructor. I had rebuilt the printer he was working on from broken machines I bought online, and I was very irritated that he was messing with my equipment. I ended up having to rebuild the machine myself because he lost multiple parts and broke some tiny wires. A second story that fits this theme occurred during my Eagle Scout project. I had about 20 people from my troop at my parents' house. One of the scouts got into an argument with my mom about what was behind a door. He insisted that it was physically impossible for the garage to be behind that door, but it was the garage. Story 77. My undergraduate degree is in economics, and my master's degree focused specifically on global agriculture and food systems. The past 90 days has been an experience. A couple of weeks ago, I actually said, "I understand tariffs. Can you please just finish fixing my toilet?" The decline of expertise has been the biggest loss of the internet age. Story 78. Men online trying to explain to me, a woman, what being a woman, giving birth, and being a mother is like. Story 79. My dad refused to let me translate Spanish for him, even though I was studying Spanish at the degree level. He said he would figure it out himself and ended up making nonsensical statements. Story 80. They claim to be autistic without realizing I work in the field every day. My job involves taking care of an autistic patient every weekday. My son has been going through the diagnostic process for 3 years now. You can schedule an appointment that lasts 20 minutes and claim you got that from a primary care physician. I am sensitive to people making such claims because it is so common now. It truly impacts lives in a significant way, so it is not acceptable to claim something you do not have. Story 81. This is a funny one. I am a high school teacher. One of my students is autistic, and their special interest is the band My Chemical Romance. They frequently tell me things about when certain songs were released and the public reception to some albums or music videos. Every time, I have to politely remind them that I was there for all of those events because I grew up with My Chemical Romance. They don't seem to understand this and are convinced that these tidbits are significant revelations. I let them continue because it makes them happy, even if it can be slightly annoying at times. Story 82. My ex discussed methods of therapy and theories of personality despite my background in psychology. He watched a couple of videos. Hence the separation. Story 83. My wife earned her Doctor of Philosophy degree in epidemiology in December 2019. It felt like a waste of money since many became experts in her field in 2020. Story 84. A police officer killed his ex-boyfriend and the new boyfriend with his issue pistol, and someone posted a story about it. A user suggested that the pistols were just available for anyone within the station. I, a recently serving member of the police force, explained how each pistol is issued to an officer at the start of their career, then locked in a designated locker with a security padlock. This locker is under 24-hour surveillance, and the gun locker is checked twice a day to ensure that only the authorized firearms are present. Another user wrote a lengthy reply, correcting my information before being ridiculed by others, and ultimately deleting the comment. Story 85. Some attorney tried to deceive me with a misleading question about ignition timing. I may currently be an unemployed hairdresser, but I worked in my father's garage, and there's a long line of mechanics in my family, though I won't share names. By the way, it's 4 degrees before top dead center. Story 86. I often encounter people debating and arguing with me about Native American history, especially in online gaming communities. I enjoy assisting independent game developers as a Native American consultant, specializing in prairie cultures. It is surprising how many individuals, predominantly from Eastern Europe, attempt to tell me that I am misinformed and then try to correct my knowledge. Story 87. My grandmother tried to convince me that her diabetes has nothing to do with the numbness in her feet. I am a nurse in an intensive care unit for patients with heart diseases. Most of them have diabetes, and many experience numbness in their feet. Story 88. I'm a pretty accomplished cyclist, but I seem to always run into complete strangers giving me advice on how to ride. It's frustrating. Story 89. Pretty much anyone talking about computers, from a hobbyist to a Navy IT professional to a back-end system engineer, I know more than most. It's amazing how people assume I don't know anything about computers because I am a woman. Story 90. I don't know if it's fair to say qualified or experienced. However, I have had a strong interest in biology since I was younger and spent countless hours each day, for years, reading about various topics in the field. This included research, studies, books, and articles. Recently, I had a minor disagreement with a friend of a friend. He skimmed an article from National Geographic and insisted he was correct about a topic that requires much more sophistication, nuance, and knowledge to make the kinds of statements he was making. I decided to let it slide because it wasn't worth the effort to educate him about biology, critical thinking, and credible sources. Story 91. A gender studies professor tried to tell me that I had no idea what I was talking about when I presented at her conference, at her direct invitation, on psychopaths and sexual predators. This was a significant part of the caseload I had while working in the prison system. Story 92. I work in marketing and have for many years. It is astonishing how often managers and chief executive officers assume they know how to do your job and that anything is possible. I had a chief executive officer dictate that the entire team needed to optimize our website's search engine optimization. So we ranked first on Google for a list of keywords including computer and refrigeration. When asked about the budget, he said they were already paying our marketing team. Story 93. Every time a conspiracy about the controlled detonation of Tower 7 on September 11th comes up, I remember being 2 blocks away when it fell. There were no explosions, only a groaning noise followed by glass breaking, then louder groans and metal twisting, more glass, and increasingly loud grinding and smashing. I was in a dead sprint in the opposite direction, but there were no loud booms. Story 94. I took a rideshare service in California from a hotel to the airport after attending a life safety conference. The vehicle was a Tesla, which I had never been in before. While chatting with the driver, he mentioned that they are very safe in terms of electronic systems. I jokingly commented that we were essentially sitting on a hydrogen bomb, but he insisted I was mistaken. I then explained in detail how a lithium-ion battery behaves during thermal runaway and the implications of off-gassing. He responded, "It's fast, watch," and accelerated. Story 95. I was born and raised in the United States in a typical American family. I moved to France in my 30s around 15 years ago, and now I consistently have coworkers explaining how American culture works, emphasizing that I do not understand it based on the week they spent in New York City. Story 96. I had someone explain to me how harmful 5G antennas are, using many technical terms specific to the field. I have worked with these types of antennas for years, and not a single technical term he used was correct. Story 97. My first week on Reddit was quite an experience, and I learned a lot about how the platform works. I have a Master of Science in Social Work and a Master of Science in Neuropsychology. With my experience in the field, I have done various things with my degrees. I came across a post where someone complained about how annoying his sisters are when he scares them. They jump and scream. I commented with a brief neurological explanation of the fight, flight, or freeze responses in the brain. He reacted hostilely and questioned my credibility. I informed him that my degree was in neuropsychology. He then stalked my profile and noticed another comment where I identified myself as a social worker. This led to him arguing with me about how social workers aren't therapists and accusing me of lying about my degrees. I chose not to engage further because I didn't find it worthwhile. However, he began taking screenshots, omitting important parts to make himself look better, and posted them across several subreddits, including r/Quiddio Herbalshit. Many users in those communities informed him that a Master of Science in Social Work does qualify someone as a therapist, and it's quite reasonable for someone to hold 2 degrees. Nonetheless, he persisted in his disbelief. It turned out he was just a 19-year-old, and I still don't understand why such a harmless comment triggered such a reaction from him. I thought, so this is how Reddit works. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.